Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good evening, afternoon, or morning, depending. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth, and we come to you live every Monday night at 7 to 9 from beautiful central New York State. Otherwise, we are on podcast forever until the Earth is incinerated. Tonight, rather than a monologue per se, I wanted to bring a couple of books to your attention. Like many of you, I am an avid reader, but it is not all and always UFO books 24/7. That way lies madness. Vary your reading. I usually vary mine with fiction or with histories or a biography. And I reread a book, a UFO book recently that is in an updated, expanded edition. I read it when it came out, but I was reminded that there is a lot of good arguments and not so good arguments around disdaining or not taking witness-driven accounts as seriously as physical evidence-driven accounts. Sometimes a preponderance of accounts by people who are credible is as valuable as weapons at the scene of a crime. And I speak here of Tom Carey and Don Schmidt's Witness to Roswell, but the 75th anniversary edition. It's a brilliant piece of research. The people that you meet are extremely authentic. I've met a number of them, although I think they're all gone now, or in their 80s. And it's just an amazing account and sets the bar high for UFO books in general. And one more reminder of why this team is such a great writing team, Carey and Schmidt. The next one, several weeks ago, we had a guest on from the United Kingdom, Steve Aspen. Steve is a retired businessman in Northern England, Central England, and has had a lifetime of what we would call taken and paranormal experiences that he dealt with by keeping them very private. During the pandemic, he decided to put them in book form. And although I know Steve very well for many years, I didn't know him nearly as well as I thought. I think he's an extraordinary writer, a very courageous one, and has written one of the most important books on the abduction phenomena I'm aware of. It is now available as an ebook and also as a real book. It's called Out of Time. It not only is one of the best documented individual accounts, it's written for folks who have no real interest, understanding, or background in this, more than it's written for those of us who do find this an important and compelling subject. And it has a concise kind of mini history of the modern age of UFOs, an equivalent history of the abduction phenomena by well-documented case, and a huge series of appendices with maybe the best single-person evidence-driven account that I'm aware of. I cannot praise this book too highly. It's going to be a perennial. I think it's one that should be in the library of every single person who has an interest in UFOs. And here's the cover. Also, in another direction, on a slightly related note, one of the kinds of fiction that I enjoy occasionally is good old-fashioned detective stories. And I had read one some time back that I liked as much as any I had read. Great characters, very good plot, a moderate to high body count, a cover-up, and a reveal that I found very moving. The author, well, that book was named Satan's Choir. Anyway, the author had contacted me some time back to let me know he had just completed a manuscript for a police mystery, a detective mystery, if you will, murder mystery, which is set in Dayton, Ohio, with the backdrop kind of being, well, one of the most famous air bases in legend in America, Wright-Patterson, home of the famous Hangar 18, and a lot of myth, lore, and probably reality around advanced technology. The author, Harley Campbell, Tom Harley Campbell, fully speaking, grew up in that area. And the thing that caught me aback was one of his best childhood friends was the son of Major Hector Quintanilla, who was the head of Project Blue Book, whose home he spent time at as a boy, who he interviewed in high school for a journalism class, and did not become a ufologist, became a writer ultimately. But it is a murder mystery with the beginning of the cover-up in the background and a series of contemporary deaths around it. And it's a great, entertaining read. I can't think of another piece of detective fiction, anything like it. It is knowledgeable. Again, this is not a UFO book. It doesn't go into great points of detail about ufology. It sets it in a location that the author knows well, with a lot of the childhood lore, and is quite credible in its scary way as far as the murder mysteries that it lays out. Just give you one piece of information on Blue Book, Tom Harley Campbell's book. You can find out about it at Tom Harley Campbell, that's CAMPBELL.com, one word. And Out of Time, you can find out more about it at outoftimebook.info. Both books are available on Amazon. And the monologue book talk part of this program now comes to an end. Tonight's guest is Matthew Moniz. He is a scientist who, for the last 30 years, has worked in the fields of analytical chemistry, molecular biology, and genetic engineering in labs in the greater Boston and Cambridge area. And he has worked on analyzing samples from many famous UFO, crop circle formation, and paranormal cases over the last couple of decades as well. I know that firsthand. He's also been the co-host, science advisor, for the long-running New England radio show Spooky South Coast for the past 17 years. He is also one of the oddballs, a very distinguished position on a very entertaining show, on the live TV show 30 Odd Minutes, hosted by Jeff Belanger, a good friend of ours. He has also been a guest on Inside Edition and Ghost Adventurers, among other shows. Moniz has been featured in dozens of books dealing with the unexplained by authors such as Peter Robbins, myself, Bud Hopkins, and others, among others. For the past 20 years, he has also worked as a sound engineer and run the AV for many conferences, and is now the official AV engineer for all UFO events for the Roswell Convention Center in Roswell, New Mexico. Matthew Moniz, my dear friend, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Why, thank you, Mr. Robbins. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
And scientifically speaking, how go things for you today?
I am functioning well within established parameters. All my autonomic systems are nominal. Thank you.
Outstanding.
Well, otherwise I'd be dead.
You know, you of course have been on the show as a panelist, and we'll be back again in a few short weeks as part of our Halloween panel. The show does fall on the 31st of this month. But we were joking before and earlier about how we would do the show. We have been friends and good friends for 30 years, had our
Yes.
share of adventures together,
And
challenges
misadventures.
and misadventures is true. And we're brought together in a way that when I look back on it, I accept that there are coincidences in life. Shit happens. Just,
Yeah.
there's no great cosmic law governing everything as far as I'm concerned. But then there are those ones where you end up saying, I wonder, in any event, let's start somewhere near the beginning. You live in Massachusetts, where you were born in that great state.
Yes. Born in New Bedford, Massachusetts in 1967.
A very historic whaling town going back to the mists of American history.
Well, at one time, it was the richest city in the world during the heyday of the whaling industry.
And whale oil being what it was.
Yeah. So very famous people throughout, the 1800s were going through New Bedford, everyone from Mark Twain, obviously, and various presidents, this and that, because that's where the money was. Just like wherever the money goes is where the powerful people wind up going to.
No question. Tell us a little bit about your folks.
All right. My parents were your basic middle class type of Southern New England folk. My mother was Irish and part Native American from the Boston area. My father, only son of Portuguese immigrants from the Azores, and both of them actually first generation Americans. Well, part of my mother's side being here a lot longer, but for the most part, very simple upbringing. My parents were Roman Catholic and what have you, but not very, we'll call it disciplined. But, went to church every now and then, various holidays and things like that. Grew up in a little coastal town here in Cape Cod and still live here today because it's a beautiful little area. And, simple, public school education, went to local community college and went, worked for my father for a little bit, and then luckily got into a particular laboratory in the town. And because I always wanted to do that, and they paid for various schools like UMass Dartmouth and little Cow College up here in Cambridge, Mass, called Harvard and stuff like that. So I started doing, science, but I also was very interested in the paranormal. I had my own UFO encounters and other experiences. Various friends lived in haunted houses. It was, not unusual to be just sitting over a friend's house. A book comes floating out of the bookcase and lands on the floor. And typical New England stoic, family, mother picks it up, puts the book back in. So what do you kids want for a snack? Type of thing. And he's like, all right, so we don't talk about the book thing. Got it. Yeah.
I think, some people might think you're joking. I know you're not. And some people just grow up more in this kind of milieu, atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, than others. When you were a young kid, was there something that you dreamt of becoming when you were grown up?
Yeah, what I am today.
Really?
I'm one of the lucky few that actually had a chance to become what they always wanted to be. And I didn't think I was going to get the chance. It just, like I said, my father had a delivery business, and just out of, while I was still in school, high school, whatever. So part of the, school after work, I'm driving from my old man back and forth to Boston or whatever, had to go wherever. And then one of the places that we delivered for was this laboratory. And it was like, I wanted to get into that kind of thing. And next thing I know, I'm talking to, every person, scientist in there that I'm making deliveries for. What does this lab do? What does that lab do? What are you doing here? What are you doing there? And I would basically hang around in the lab waiting for samples to be go here, go there, and because I was a guy, picking up, bringing it to the next lab. I'm questioning what they're doing there and there because that's what I wanted to do. But I thought I was just going to be, basically a truck driver type of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with truck drivers, it's what paid my father, and things like that. So anyway,
Matt, do you remember what it was specifically as a young boy that triggered an interest so profound in science per se that it became your life professionally?
Well, number one, I've always had an interest in, where am I? What am I? Where is this? What is this? The basic wonder of, that we all have. I just carried it on from a childhood. I was always very curious. Sometimes that was a good thing. A lot of times it wasn't, trying to figure out what's going on. And, I would voraciously read various books about things. I wanted to know, so I would educate myself. Once, one of the things that I'm very lucky is I picked up reading very early and reading and comprehension. So I would read whatever I wanted, but it was at a detriment to my regular schooling because I'm reading this, going on to what I want to know about. I don't care about, and the teacher would be mad that I'm not focusing on this. But it's like, but I don't care about that. I care about this. This is what I want to read. Well, math is math. So, but when you're talking history and science and literature and stuff like that, I would be focusing on, technical, historical, things like that. There were some adventure stuff that I would get into, but for me, it had to be cerebrally attractive to me, stuff like Tolkien and, Kurt Vonnegut and, I can name a bunch of other like sci-fi greats and this and that can be a whole show in and of itself. But I would teach myself and, I had some science teachers I loved and some science teachers I didn't going through school. But when I was able to, like I said, work for this local lab, picking up the samples and bringing things back and getting to know how they all worked and what all of the stuff was, one of the directors there asked, do you want a job? And I literally felt like gobsmacked. It's like, wait a minute, I just went to high school. I haven't even had a chance, to get into, a college yet. It's like, well, you already picked up what we're doing here and we'll pay for school. Wow. And I'm like, told my dad, and he's like, if that's your dream, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. So I started off, pretty much a couple of years out of high school and just started washing beakers, and, cleaning, making basic solutions for this and that. And my school, even though I decided, to go to local community college down the road type of thing.
Sure.
Was one of these things. It's just to go through literally the academics of things. But my real school was working in the lab, learning people that already had been in industry. And that was far more valuable than any class that I've ever taken. Okay.
Everything you're saying makes perfect sense. And obviously in the world of science, which is such a breathtakingly large word in terms of its implications, you have become an acknowledged, respected specialist in several areas. I went over them and brought you on, but worthy of just reviewing. Analytical chemistry.
Right. Do you want to know? Well, you've been to my lab. You were actually at the lab that I was talking about 30-something years ago. That particular lab was in an environmental lab. So to clarify things, I've been in the three major type of laboratories there are in science. I worked for several years in environmental. I worked for several years in another type of lab, which was a physical testing, basically working for a company that was like Underwriters. We would test physical things from, everyday manufacturer. And my particular area was, we would check everything from the contents of shampoo to over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, making sure everything was in there that was supposed to be, and then checking for other things that shouldn't be in there, physical testing. And then for the last decade, almost decade and a half, I've been working in pharmaceutical and biotech.
Right, but that what you just described, that kind of sums up analytical chemistry.
Well, no, analytical chemistry is where you take a substance and you break it down. It tells you all of the things that are in it, what things are made of.
Okay.
All right, so that is my job, main focus. I run all types of very, very, very specific and very, very expensive and sensitive instrumentation. Things like, it's called chromatography and spectroscopy. HPLC, high pressure or high performance liquid chromatography, and mass spec, both LC and MS. I've also dealt with NMR and a whole host of other things. But where I'm at now, I'm learning molecular biology and genetic engineering as well.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. Basically, the company I'm working at now is a very cutting edge biotech. And what we do is we take very basic organisms like yeast, E. coli, or various other microorganisms. And we take their genes and move them around, add them, delete them, and insert whatever we want to make them produce everything from simple sugars like you find in Coke Zero and flavors to pharmaceuticals and, proteins and antibodies used in vaccines. We can manipulate various things, and make all kinds of products from beginning to end of that kind of thing. And it's a green renewable energy type of material, because before, and I worked in all of the large major pharmaceutical houses and stuff, in the Boston, Cambridge area, doing stuff, and a lot of their stuff is synthetic. But our stuff, you basically engineered the bug, as we affectionately call it, and then the material is brewed rather than synthesized. Like you've engineered this bug to, if you feed it, it produces chemical X, whatever your desired product is, and it's brewed in a big fermenter like you see in a brewery, and then you drain it all out and you extract the material that you're looking for, and your biomass that's left over is able to be recycled. You dry it out and put it in cattle food stock and various other things, or reuse it again as other materials for other things. And the water is easily reclaimed. It's renewable and more green and friendly.
Matt, in the world of popular culture or normal superficial media coverage of this, that, and the other thing, whatever point of view it's taking, for many of us, we're conditioned when we think or we hear that term genetic engineering. We think GMO, genetically modified organism.
Yes.
We think our food sources, for some people, it's like anything that's been genetically engineered is part of the cabals wanting to get its teeth into me and control. So let's clarify a little bit.
Let's clarify that. Okay. People don't understand that we've been genetically modifying organisms for as long as we've been cultivating things. That's what, our dogs that we have today come from selective breeding of traits that we took from wolves, foxes, coyotes, and other canines. We've been breeding and modifying genes, for tens of thousands of years already. The difference of what we're doing in now is we're able to manipulate these same things by ourselves. We already know what these things are. I mean, there are some disadvantages of doing certain things too there, but for the most part, when you see the term GMO, it is not necessarily all that bad because we have, the wheat that we've gotten today came from thousands of years of genetic manipulation by, cross-pollinating. We're doing the same thing now. We're just skipping the burden to be and, doing it in a petri dish. But like I said, there are sometimes there, let me phrase this carefully. There are chances for certain things to go wrong when you start playing around with certain things. Simple organisms, simple things, simple problems. More complicated organisms, more complicated things, more complicated problems. Okay? That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Now, going to another thread, at how old were you when you became aware, or it was obvious to you, brought to your attention in some way, that an experience or some kinds of experiences you were having were not standard? Other kids weren't having these kinds of experiences, and how you should think about them, discuss them, not discuss them. What happened that made you begin to understand that your life was not quite like a lot of the other kids you knew?
Oh, probably when I was, very young, 3, 4, because of, various things happening to me at that time that I didn't understand, of which I do now.
Of course.
It would, and being kind of focused on trying to get a better understanding of what was going on and where I am and all of that, it kind of made me a little bit of an outsider, because he's this or that, because he, likes looking into science and stuff like that, because other kids, when they're all into, whatever activity, sport thing, granted, I still played all that other stuff, but my mind was to go, another place. I just didn't stop there. I went, I was still looking to go beyond.
So give us an example, a memory of something from childhood that you now understand is a paranormal or UFO related incident.
Okay. It is one of my earliest memories. And this is long before all of these movies and things and whatever came
Very
out.
important to note that.
Yeah. And my sister had been born, so I was 3, 4 years old, somewhere around there. And where I lived at that time was right outside, literally, the gates of Otis Air Force Base, which is now U.S. Joint Base Space Force, whatever, of Cape Cod. Wow. I was, in my bedroom, playing with little Matchbox cars, little toy die-cast cars. And my parents were in their bedroom. My sister was still in a bassinet, whatever, in their room. So I had bedroom to myself. It was in the evening, but where the house was, there was a light on a pole where the parking area was for the apartment thing that we're in. And there was enough ambient light coming in through the window for me to be sitting on my bed with my knees up, and I had my little blanket up over my knees and my Matchbox. I was using my legs as a ramp for the cars to go zip, zip, as a kid does, entertaining myself. I was happy. I was playing with the cars.
Yeah. And
next thing I know, the light that was outside was more of a yellow type of, like, the old bulbs that were yellow that didn't attract as many insects.
Yeah.
that kind of, back in the 70s, whatever. So that was a yellowish amber light. And then all of a sudden I notice a brighter light coming in through the window at a different angle in like in a streaming beam type of thing. And it was blue-green-ish, like a turquoise-ish color. It started light at first, and then it got more intense, and the intensity grew and grew and grew. And at that point, I started feeling a temperature change in the room, so much that my closet door literally creaked open, like you hear in your typical horror movie, because the pressure in the room had changed, and I got this real creeped out feeling. And what would a typical 4-year-old do in that particular case? Hide under the covers, because that's where you find safety at 4 years old. You hide under the covers. If I
can't see you.
Yeah, exactly. So as I'm hiding under the covers, next thing I know, I could see shadow, where the light was at the end of the bed. I'm like, uh-oh. And next thing I know, I feel a set of footsteps on either side of my body on my bed, and my body began to lock straight out, to the point where my fingers and toes were so stretched out they were hurting. And I tried very hard to scream, but all I could get out was a and my eyes were moving a mile a second. People, sleep paralysis. Well, first off, sleep paralysis means you have to be asleep first. I was wide awake. So, and number two, sleep paralysis only lasts for seconds. And this, anyway, I was like petrified in a type of panic that I had never really felt at my short life at that point before. And I remember this hand coming on my face through the to the sheet, and it was like searching for the end of the covers. I could tell it was looking to grab the sheet. And my last conscious memory is it finding the edge of the sheet and pulling it down off of my face. And I'm this far away, nose to nose, with something that ain't from around here. And when I mean that, I mean, you would call it a gray today, but its face was, it had almondish shaped eyes that were kind of black, but the thing that got me was the nose, the way the nose was and the mouth, but more importantly was the skin. This thing looked old, ancient. And it didn't have smooth skin. It had the best way I could describe it is, how an elephant skin is wrinkled and mottled. It had that type of wrinkling and mottling, but it wasn't completely gray. If you've ever seen a rainbow trout, it has pinks and black dots and grays, and that's what the way its skin was. It was mottled with all of that coloration in it, predominantly gray, but like I said, there were flakes of black and silver and gold and blue and reds and pinks, and the way it was just, and that was the last image I got. And I remember the nose opening and closing as it was breathing right in front of my face, and that was the last thing I remember.
What a memory.
That, and like I said, that's a conscious memory.
Yeah. When was it, whether we're 3 or 4 years old, it depends number of factors, but I guess in one sense, it'd be perfectly understandable for you to blurt all this out to your mom and dad looking for some kind of answer, or intuitively to know I'm not going to get what I need here, and having it become part of your secret life. How did you deal with that memory, Matthew?
it caused problems. It got me because how do I want to put this? And after that event, it severely traumatized me, and I'll briefly touch it. I won't get into details, but when I was at it's a Head Start program, where your parents bring you in. Anyway, my Head Start program actually was on the Air Force Base at that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I would be brought onto the Air Force Base and one of these little Quonset huts, and in the Quonset hut they had like AstroTurf and this little white picket fence where they put the toys for the kids, a little play area for kids. So I was in there building something, playing with something, trying to make something to help make me feel safe from this thing or whatever that was in my head that I was reliving. This happened, within weeks of this event. While I was doing this kid knocked over what I was doing, and kids get into altercation. So I had to leave because I punched little, you got what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, okay. So then.
Got it.
Left that. And then my parents wound up moving because my father got a job at another location shortly after that anyway. So we moved over the bridge, as I say, to where I am now, and grew up in basically it's a trailer park without the wheels, if that makes any sense. They're single floor ranch slab house, development,
Yep.
So that's basically where I grew up from little kid to into my teens, early 20s.
In whatever, was there ever a time where you tried to or you did communicate to your mom or dad?
Oh, yeah. After that event. Oh, that's an interesting dream, honey. The typical things that, parents would do to us. Like, yeah, it sounds like you had a bad dream.
Yep. Doing their best to see it from their point of view.
I don't fault them for it. They, where the kid comes up with this kind of story, stop watching these things, stop reading that, because I was reading all kinds of crazy, stuff as a kid, various comic books and this and that. But
at what point did you either become aware of or decide to act on the idea of reading a book or books written by respected researchers in the field of UFO studies, paranormal studies, to either validate or for your own curiosity? Do you remember any of the first books that you actually read around that, as opposed to science per se or any other interest?
In the 70s, I read a lot of the In Search Of books, and the pulp trope that was out at that time, just because that's all there really was.
Right.
And I was more interested in going into the science field rather than what back then would have been thought of as science fiction, even though I was still, having these weird experiences as I was growing up. And what happened to me in my teenage years, and that's a whole story that we can get into in a little bit.
Yes.
But I was more interested in, we'll say, in my late teens through my mid-teens and early 20s. I was more interested in historical, things going on, and things metaphysical were more like magic, ghosts. I was looking at the unexplained. That was the other unexplained stuff. So as far as I was concerned, I know there are crazy things that are out there and beyond the stars, but I, like I said, in the course of living here, I lived literally one town over from Plymouth. So some of the oldest houses around in this country are where I live.
Yeah.
So my area is pretty well haunted, and has a very big history of being haunted around here. So, not to mention, plenty of history with Salem right up there with witches and all of these other sort of things. And believe it or not, some of the very earliest reportings of Bigfoot come from this area. People don't understand, you got to think in the way they spoke back then. When they were talking about, and this comes from various things that they wrote about, when they were talking about wild men that they ran into out here, this is what they use for the term for Bigfoot. People confusing saying wild men with what they used to call savages or the Native Americans. There was a distinct distinction between the two, but the one got conflated being the other. What they were talking about, the tribes of these wild men, meaning actually we were talking about a lot of Bigfoot that were living in the area. Now, the Native Americans have known them being here for literally thousands and tens of thousands of years. Their name for them is actually called Sabe, which they are a people, not an ape or an animal. They're an actual people with a culture, per se, at least according to a Native American legend. Also, actually, now a lot of Bigfoot researchers saying, yeah, these are a people and they do have a culture. But anyways, getting away from, where I live is right outside the Bridgewater Triangle, famously made famous by, obviously, Lauren Coleman, and of course the guys that made the documentary, of which I'm in. But so the area that I'm in, very rich and very steeped in the unexplained. Okay.
Do you remember, again, going back to your childhood, if possible, based on these facts, and when we first spent time together, it was when you and your then wife were living in Fall River, Massachusetts.
Correct.
Which is a very famous location in America, lore, fiction, not fiction, definitely reality, but a real life crime that
was century
elevated to the level of pure mythology, and that, of course, is the Lizzie Borden axe murders. You can't grow up in that part of the country without being fully aware. I remember in elementary school, even we learned out on Long Island, New York, the epic poem, Lizzie Borden.
Took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
Exactly.
The real number is 11 and 17, but that doesn't really rhyme. So
now I bring up the Borden case because not only are you a New Englander who deeply knowledgeable of it, you have friends, the people who own the Borden home, which
I have my own key to the house for a decade and a half.
And for those people who...
Anne is now deceased and somebody else owns it. But yeah, I know the house quite intimately.
And it is still repurposed to be a B&B?
Still is a B&B and a museum at the same time.
There you go. For some of you, I'm reminded of a wonderful book called Assassination Vacation. If you are touring the United States and looking for macabre locations to stay, you can stay in Lizzie's room, the parents' room, Bridget, the servant's room. You can be, if you like, you can have their last meal served to you or that last breakfast. I'm sure it's easy enough to find, and a bit of dark reality brought to the present. Let's talk a bit about
2nd Street, Fall River, Mass.
Oh, okay, great. Do you remember the first time as a kid that one of your schoolmates or something shared with you perhaps some New England-based bit of legend, myth that actually they had interfaced with in some way?
Well, I had a number of friends relate a number of different types of,
Of
the big
course.
three, whether it be, I've had other friends that used to ride horses that would run across a local Bigfoot. I had a number of friends that we all saw UFOs at the same time. I had plenty of friends that lived in houses built in the 1600s
Oh
that,
boy.
well haunted. Pick one.
Haunted.
Okay.
How I know, the way that those on the other side manifest themselves in so many reports, credible and incredible. What have you experienced, or somebody who you know and trust and respect, that they have experienced that has been something that you never forgot?
Okay. You're talking from childhood or any?
Whatever is the most profound that comes to your mind first.
Okay, locally, like I said, since I've had, the key to Lizzie Borden's on a number of occasions, that house has produced, there's video I've got of it, whatever it is, moving my camera, not once, but twice within a minute and a half. And if people want to go look that up, Spooky South Coast, Lizzie Borden. We have tons of videos from that, but yeah, you can actually see the camera being moved. You can hear it being picked up and moved in the kids, what they call the kids room. But I've spent so many nights in that place. I think probably one of the biggest nights that will stick with me is, for many years, my younger sister was like, why are you into that stuff? She was always, you're crazy. Why are you wasting your time? Well, she had one of her friends that was really into this stuff and kept bugging my sister, have your brother take us, have your brother take us. And my sister finally got worn down and said, hey, Matt, can you bring us? So she'll shut up. I'm like, okay, come on. She didn't think anything about it. She just thought, okay, I'm going to go here with my friend, and she's going to walk around in the dark, and I'm just going to sit there and, play on my phone. Yeah. Good luck with that. So, I brought my sister and her friend. We'll call her friend Maureen. And Maureen's like, okay, well, this is, oh, great. I want to go do this. I want to go check out that. It's like, well, time out. Let's start in the basement, work our way up to the attic. Start at the ground floor, work your way up. Let's, do this logically and linearly. And so you got the lay of the land. And then if you want to go running around here in the dark at night, go ahead. So I started off in the basement, and Maureen was to my left. My sister was to my right. And there's been plenty of activity in the basement. And people don't realize there's well, let me finish with the story first. My sister sits standing there in typical, like, I'm bored, this is stupid, why am I wasting my time here? And Maureen's like, if there's anybody here, can you make your presence known? And in between the triangle of us, a little kid's voice goes,
Ooh.
My sister's jaw hit the floor, at which I picked it up and put it back on her. And she went, oh, crap. And I'm like, welcome to my world. And that was just the start of the night. All right. Now, you want a little bit of history why that kid thing is important?
Yes, we have the time for that.
People just know about Lizzie Borden and the mother and the father. 20 years prior to Andrew and Abby being murdered, Ledwig Borden, who is Andrew's uncle, owned the property next door to that house. He had a wife, Liza, and they had 3 kids. And in rapid succession she had them, and they think because of postpartum depression,
Uh-oh.
she drowned the 3 kids in the well in the property next door, of which they built the house over, and slit her throat. So the house is built over where the well was, where the kids were killed, and where she killed herself. So there's 3 murders and a suicide before Andrew and Abby.
That
So,
would have a vibe.
Yeah. Well, there's other deaths that happened in that house after Abby and Andrew. There's plenty more. That place has got a history more than just the 2 that made the place famous.
As we move into our last 5 minutes or so of the first hour, Matt, as a man of science, somebody who routinely runs procedures to validate reality in physical materials, any thoughts at all on that bleed through between that curtain on the other side and that level of manifestation on this from a scientific point of view, if possible?
All right. In terms of physics, everything is a matter of vibration. Okay. We're all just forms of vibration in various levels and frequencies. We know that, if you take Einstein, energy can be neither created nor destroyed, only changed. And by that, you're changing frequency and resonance. So, and given laws of entropy, that explains that, beyond a certain point, that energy goes back to the ethers, per se. It also explains why you don't see ghosts of dinosaurs, and things like that. And general hauntings lose their energy or repetition over time. But the same thing about energy. You're starting at one frequency and you're just slowly moving off. Occasionally, these frequencies move and fluctuate and pulsate. And then every now and then they'll bump. And that's where you get these. And this happens in all kinds of areas of physics. So we know that this does happen. The hows and whys of it, we're still working on. And that gets into quantum level stuff. But to keep it simple for everybody else, yeah, we understand that, this is just beyond our physics. Now, let me clarify something else that people don't understand. Believe it or not, ghosts still conform to the laws of thermodynamics. And by this, it has to do with energy and work. When people hear, the stories, oh, this room is getting cold. Well, what's looking to happen in order to create a change in something, in chemistry, it's known as an endothermic reaction. It draws heat energy. Energy is energy, whether you're drawing it as heat or whatever source. You're drawing or using energy to then produce work, or work produces exothermic reaction. So when a ghost makes something, and I'm using the air quotes ghost because we don't really know what we're really talking about here, but this is just one of the theories. It still creates an exothermic reaction by things being heated. And this has been borne out by people that record this material or happenings with thermal imaging. So we know that, cold, the energy is being drawn to be able to do something, like to touch somebody, to move an object, and that is registered in heat. So still, the laws of thermodynamics are still in play. It's the mechanisms that's being used from the other side or whatever. We know that energy is still there. Okay. Consciousness. This is, if you're really to get into esoteric things, everything is still consciousness, depending upon who you're reading. You want to go digging down Deepak Chopra and all. I'm You know what I mean? You can. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. We don't really know. Here's another thing that people don't understand. Science is a belief system. No, seriously. We believe we know what's going on right now. It's always open to change, but we believe we understand. It's only believing what we currently can understand right now. If you go back literally 100 years, you just go back 100 years, speed of sound, we'll never break the speed of sound. We'll never fly. Merely a decade later, there's from 1900 and was 1909, there's Orville and Wilbur, flying 200 and whatever. Okay, in science, you figured we would have learned by now, not to say that's not possible, because we have a habit of proving ourselves wrong all the time. So,
a perfect note to end our first hour on. This is Meanwhile Here on Earth. Your host, Peter Robbins, and my special guest tonight, Matthew Moniz. We will be back in 3 minutes and 57 seconds, give or take. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
It's not just a donation.
It's a warm blanket.
It's a bottle of clean water.
It's a roof and a bed.
It's knowing someone cares.
It's feeling safe.
It's a today that's better than yesterday.
Every dollar you can spare helps so much more than you can imagine. Please, donate now to help people affected by Hurricane Ian. Your support is urgently needed.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And we are back. Peter Robbins, Matthew Moniz, and Juno, the official Meanwhile Here on Earth cat, to join us for special guest appearance. Matt, we've known each other again for 30 years, and we met in a somewhat serendipitous manner. And again, like talking before we went on the air, I believe that there are coincidences, that things happen in a certain way that mean absolutely nothing and have no particular value or perspective or mystical dent. Other things, give me a break. It's like the universe tapping you on the shoulder and you turn and it hits you with a left hook, just saying, just wanted to remind you that there is some sense of organization and symmetry to the universe, and thought I'd knock you off your feet for a moment just to recharge your battery on that one. I had, in 1988, made my first trip over to the UK to begin research on a book that became Left at Escape, about the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, Britain's, well, the UK's best known UFO event. And in a field where something had allegedly happened, I drew some soil samples from what logically seemed to be the area in question, the edge, and a control sample from out in the field or two. I was not prepared for this. I was shooting 35 millimeter film. I put my samples in carefully, tinily labeled 35 millimeter film canisters, and get back to the States and find a laboratory that analyzes soil. And I was inevitably hooked up with a scientist named Matthew Moniz.
Moniz?
Several of those very historic 30-year-old samples, still, of course, containing germs from Mars that, if let loose on the Earth, would destroy humanity as we imagine it to be. Not really. And I contacted him. I'm feeling pretty full of myself. After all, I'm a UFO researcher on a serious project, growing to be a legend in my own mind. And I asked the scientist if he will analyze them. He asked me how much I have. I tell him, and he says to me back and forth electronically, words to the effect of, "You haven't done this before, have you?" I agreed. He told me he needed pounds, perhaps 15 pounds of dirt would be a good amount, and that if I was interested, he would send me 3 or 4 2-quart heavy gauge plastic brown containers that I could use to collect soil in and bring them back to the States. A year and a half later or so, I was back. I returned to the field. I dug up that soil. I labeled it. I brought it back through customs, which was an interesting little story in itself, and contacted Mr. Moniz, the laboratory employee I had been assigned to. And he did a in-depth analysis of the differences between these 3 samples. And it began, at first, a very cordial and friendly acquaintanceship, and then a real friendship. And at some point, we finally met up in 91, we think it is, at the now defunct, but certainly very popular conference series for 10 years, the Omega Conferences, which took place in North Haven, Connecticut, every autumn, as I recall, and had quite a stellar lineup over the decade, I must say. Anybody spoke there. And a gentleman had been invited to speak from England, who was a specialty researcher in a relatively new area for most of us. It was Colin Andrews' very first ever crop circle presentation on the subject of UFO, of crop circles in America. The talk in America, the crop circles in England. And so the 3 of us actually met, spent some time together. I then was invited by Matt to visit him. And were you still married at the time to Lisa?
I was at the time, yes.
And you lived...
That's when I was living in Fall River, yeah.
Right, okay. Again, the home of the Borden family. And we really sat down and talked about a lot of things for the first time. Matt knew that my basic job, something I was very proud of, was I worked as Bud Hopkins' assistant. And Bud was arguably the godfather, or certainly the pioneer researcher of the Sirius study, a scientific study of the UFO abduction phenomenon. One thing led to another, and Matt told me some things about his life with his wife, childhood, and ultimately about a realization that they had that really took me aback, because in my entire sweeping knowledge of the subject, which went back to my studies in the mid-'70s and the time I was spending with Bud, we had only seen what Matt was describing one other time, and that in what became a very high visibility event and a very well-known book, Witness: The True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO Abduction, involving a woman who we remain good friends with, who went under the pseudonym of Linda Corteil. And it's one of the most challenging and dynamic and amazing case histories ever. But Matt, would you share with our viewers and listeners basically what I'm alluding to here? You are living your life, you meet a lovely woman, you are drawn to each other and decide maybe we are for each other, and start at the beginning and give us an idea what happened.
You put that in a very neat little box, but it's a little bit more complicated, and I'll try and share it for the audience. One of the things that helped lead me to you is also doing the things with Bud, and one of the things that he hooked me up with, pieces of Betty Hill's dress. I was doing some more work on analysis on that, and Bud also recommended towards you a couple. It's funny how, like you said, you and I got crossed up, but Lisa, and that is her name, and our cases out there. Her and I met before we met, and by that I'll clarify it. As people have already known here, I had encounters as a child, a very young child. Well, it continued on when I was a teenager, which I alluded to earlier. One of the particular events where I was brought to wherever there is, I was brought into a room, and this room, best way I could describe it is almost amphitheater-ish, whereas there was a central path, and up on either side were graduating levels of boxes, like boxes of various shapes, but it grew up to the sides. Or another way to think of it would be similar to a football stadium, but a little narrower. Anyway, I was brought in, door on one end, basically shoved in, because my interactions with them aren't, I'll call them pleasurable or peaceful. Whenever I get a chance, I run amok and, I wreak havoc. And so I'm sent into this gigantic room with all of these big boxes, gray boxes. And I'm like, okay. And I walk over, sit down on one of the boxes in the middle of this room. Like, what the hell is this all about? And then the door opens on the other end. And there's this young teenage girl with two of these little things, and they escort her into the room and then step out. And I'm looking at her. She's looking at me. She comes over in typical fashion. It's like, what's this all about? Who are you? What, do you know what's going on? I don't know what's going on, So we start trying to figure out, what the hell is this all about? Why are we here? What's going on? And we're there about 5-10 minutes, and I'm talking to her, doing typical teenage things, talking about school, music, your parents, movies, your typical thing when you're, a teenager. And I start, flirting a little, and she's flirting back, and I'm playing with the particular outfit that we both had on, which has, we'll call it unique properties. And I was playing with the property, and she was doing the same back to me. And we're talking, and then all of a sudden, maybe 15, 20 minutes goes by. And like I said, we have pretty in-depth conversation. The door opens up on the other side where she came from, and they basically motion for her to come. And me being Mr. Bravado, I jump in between her and them, and I was like, you're going to have to get through me to take her. And one of the few occasions, and I mean few, people talk about all of this existential communications and rainbow farting unicorn crap that, gets imparted to them. Me, they give me orders, do this, do that, whatever. So basically they're like, if you don't let her go, you don't get to go home as soon. And I'm like, screw it. Here you go. Shoved her towards them. I was like, okay, bye. Nice to know you. I want to go home. So they take her out, and I go back, and fast forward, several years later, it's April Fool's at the local community college I was at.
Oh gosh!
In a planetarium, with a UFO lecture being given by Stanton Friedman. Okay. So,
where else?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, a planetarium has that same kind of theaterish type of seating, in the central thing. And I'm in the front row, and remember my friend Maurice, right?
Yes, of course.
So he's sitting next to me, and Stanton's up there giving his, his usual spiel of railing against NASA and everybody. And on the door on the other side of the planetarium opens up, and she walks through the door. And I'm like, whoa. I literally stand up, walk. I'm in like my own little world here. Walk right past him. I remember standing and watching me walk by him as he's giving his spiel. And I make a beeline to her. She's walking through, and she's carrying a bag and a coat, and all of a sudden drops it on the floor as she's looking at me. And we both sit down and start conversation. And interesting night. Week or two later, we're meeting up for coffee, and then a couple months later, we're living together. And we were together for 5-6 years. And yeah, that's how we started talking. Bud did a regression on both of us, and we got a little bit more of the story. And he was fascinated because he was just starting to find other cases like ours. And Bud had Lisa and I basically be his, couple, or here, talk to when you get these cases here, talk to this couple, they'll help you out, and they'll help, we would basically help Bud by talking to these other people.
Yeah.
And so they would understand, hey, you're not the only ones. But anyway.
When you initially saw each other in that lecture theater, right, in that craft, did you consciously connect it with those earlier memories, or it was just something?
Well, I definitely knew where I was, and I definitely knew, I had other. Yeah, she knew that's the whole thing. After we had met, after we'll call it the lecture thing where Stanton was there, we started talking about all of our childhood things. She had this happen in this time, and I had this happen at my time, and dum 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 dum, and oh, okay, and then we were wondering, is this being orchestrated? You start wondering about the relationship itself. Like I said, our feelings were real, but then you still have to question, why are we together? Is it because we want to be or because we were made to be? And, we did eventually end up getting divorced, but, particularly human reasons and all kinds of other stuff. Although she's still a friend today, I still, and I'm friendly with her, even though, this is many years ago.
Yeah.
Well, you also know the second story. Okay. This is not the first time this has happened to me meeting other people.
Yeah.
Back when I was living with Lisa, we were both still having occurrences and still being introduced to other people. Well, anyway, I had, while I was living with Lisa, another encounter where in abductions, sometimes people are together and they move them along as a group to this and that, and then go off and do different things. Well, I remember on one particular occasion, I was sitting in a room and a set of twin girls come out and they're sitting and I'm talking to them, what's going on? Where are we going? We don't know. And then they put us all on, best way to describe it would be a look, feel of a subway car type of thing. You go in and we're going wherever, door opens up and it's like, okay, you girls go that way, you go that way. I didn't think nothing of it because things like that had happened before. Well, I'm now in my early 20s working in another lab now, and all of a sudden I need an outlet. I need to go do something. So I had been doing sound work for years for other little bands, and next thing I know, I was like, oh, I got a job working at a biker bar run by the Hells Angels as their sound guy. So great guys to work for, guys you don't want to piss off, but okay, well. So they're like, here's the sound system, book bands and run them through. So every Friday and Saturday night, that was my therapy after working in, science. I would go, connect up the microphones, run the, my board channel, with all the different channels and everything, mic up all the bands and let them rock out. And I would eat and drink for free. And I was single at the time. And, anyway, having a grand old time on Fridays and Saturday nights. Well, this particular band was playing and I'm working at the soundboard, and all of a sudden these two twins walk in. And I was like, and one of them walks over into me and I'm like, it's deja vu all over again. This is the second group of people I've met out, in one of these things. And they've been dear friends ever since.
Yes.
Some people they orchestrate for trying to get them to produce things. Other people, they bring them together for other interactions. Luckily with these twins, they were very good, wound up being very, very good friends and still are to this day. And so, like I said, I'm used to having these kind of people in my life.
It's important that I say here that what Matt has just described of that, not a sense, but an absolute knowledge that you've been brought together, that you have seen each other, that you remember each other from a location, is extremely well documented among highly credible witnesses, experiencers, abductees, for some decades now. Even though, again, if you're not studied in the evidences and case histories, sounds like science fiction, of course. Matt, once you had connected with Bud, with Colin Andrews, who wasn't, Colin's, of course, lives in Connecticut for many years now, is not very actively involved in crop circle research, but in running his and Cynthia's beautiful farm. But at a time, he was not only the best known crop circle researcher, investigator in the world, he's the man who coined the term crop circle and possibly crop formation, but crop circle for sure. And is, of course, a dear friend of both of ours. what I'd like you to talk about for a bit is at a certain point, either Bud or Colin, and then quite a number of other people. And I know right now, you've been looking at sample that Deb Jordan White originally collected.
I don't know what this will show, but me with good old Colin back in the day.
Yeah, it shows great. And you both look very sharp. But you have been asked and hired and worked repeatedly on analysis. I think it's fair generalization to say of organic material brought into contact with a UFO, a paranormal situation, or something where anomalous circumstances have deeply affected the composition of materials and change them. Can you give us some examples of this from your memory and your files, so to say?
Well, like I said, I got some pictures of stuff here or whatever, but let me just talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay. First thing, like with your samples and other samples, like from Debbie Jordan's case I've been looking at, which reminds me, I got pictures I got to send you guys. We'll go with Rendleshams. That soil had definitely been affected by something. In particular, there would definitely had to have been some high degree of electromagnetic energy, because the soil was being bombarded with some form of energy as well as electromagnetism, because the amount of FeO, or what other people would know would be a form of rust, people know as FeO2, but this is just FeO, which is a highly oxidized reduced version of this, which people might better know it as meteorite dust, because as a meteorite comes through the atmosphere, it's in a hot enough thing where it loses another oxygen, becomes FeO. It's not a chemistry lesson. Anyway, that material naturally blankets the earth, okay, in a pretty uniform manner, and can be found in soil. Well, what was interesting about this particular case is that material had been dragged and concentrated to a level like 10 times beyond what is normal, and infused into this. It almost made it a form of glass type of material, which made it what's called hydrophobic. Whereas if you take regular soil and you put water on it, it makes mud. Okay, to be technical, makes mud. This stuff, you put water on it, it rolled and beat and rolled off, because it didn't have a mechanism. Well, it had less of a mechanism to be able to retain or hold the water, because the way the shapes of the soil had been rounded and things like that. It has to do with surface tension and several other items. But that was physically changed and physically measurable in instrumentation. I did it by what's known as atomic absorption mass spectroscopy. Another friend that we know did it under electron microscope and basically got the same confirming data that, high degree of this. Yep, that's why it's red. So that definitely showed that something happened. Okay, it's not nothing, As we know, witnesses had seen something out there at that time. We're talking multiple witnesses, not just one person saying it. There were a number of people that agree that something was there.
Yeah.
Go back and there's something that affected that area. Well, the rest can be debated, but the physical change is there. It was measurable. I still have some. So, you can look at it, you can touch it. If you want to lick it, that's you. But you understand what I'm saying. It's there. It's not a question of it's in somebody's head.
Plus, you have the sample, the control sample, as they say, drawn from out in the field completely unaffected to compare that to.
Correct.
Standard scientific method.
Yes. So that's just one. I've, like I said, done some stuff with Betty Hill's dress, which was pretty interesting because that was a polycotton blend with a vegetable dye base.
Okay.
And one of the things I also did some of this work with Phyllis Buttinger. I don't know if you know who she is. But anyway, she's worked on the dress as well as several other famous cases. Now, what was interesting about hers is Phyllis found some enzymes, and I was looking at the way the material had been degraded. She found various organic enzymes that she wasn't able to identify. I was looking at fibers and dye that had been degraded under a high degree of UV light, or looked like it was, people would call it sun faded, but we're talking the sun on steroids type of, degradation. So here you are, somebody with a story. Here's a physical change. It's not in the head,
In the crop formation phenomena, due to some highly concentrated bad press over the years, I don't know, I think a certain number of people who are interested but not that interested to simply take the word of a naysayer, especially if it's in high visibility media. To paraphrase our old friend, the late great Stanton T. Friedman, the question is not, are all crop circles the result of paranormal activity, for lack of a better term? The question is, have any of them ever been, in the light of the fact that we know that many of them are faked, and in some cases extremely elegantly? And I think the answer to the question is yes. Some of these have formed in ways that completely defy logic or conventional scientific explanation, including one of the things I'm sure it's interested you as much as me, besides any physiological change to the material, the fact that the crop itself, it's not squashed down. It seems to instantaneously grow an elbow and then grow at 45-degree angle from it, 90-degree angle from it.
Correct.
And then in some cases, braid itself together. And in some cases, which completely defies any scintilla of understanding in my brain, that it's laid down in concentric and then a counter concentric layer, which of course is impossible, but happens. Has any of your crop circle analysis really revealed something that made your eyebrows go up in terms of, I have no idea, and this is fascinating, definitive stuff?
Yes.
Anything come to mind on that?
Oh, I did a lot of work on crop circles, and I've worked on stuff that I know was a legit crop circle, and I also worked on stuff that I know was man-made hoaxes. Now, what's interesting is, what you're talking about. I went to England in '91, and I looked at some of these things myself. I looked at what was told to be a known hoax. Okay, so what am I looking at? Yeah, this is crushed and flattened and goes in one direction. Then somebody brought me to what is said to be a real one, and I'm looking at this and I'm pulling things apart, and you're right. When you're stomping on, plants with board and rope, you're only going to be able to lay it down in one direction. This had multiple layers going back and forth, and the plants weren't broken. That's the part that really made my noodle go like, what the hell is this? And in some cases, they were interwoven. Okay. Now, if you're going to sit there and do a 50-foot diameter circle, interweaving these layers, 50-foot wide and alternating swirling patterns and not get caught, good luck. Because I was there when they did that great hoaxing competition. Yeah. There were 20 different groups, and the winning group were amateurs per se that took them 8 hours to do just a basic 50-foot thing. And, it took 5 guys 8 hours to do it, to do it really well and to be, and what was interesting, and this is the part that I went, there's got to be something more going on. All of the groups that say, we're the ones that did it, we're the ones that, they were all at this competition. The following morning, there were more crop circles found in the surrounding area than had ever been found before. And all of the groups that said, we're the ones that did it, we know where y'all were, that night. So, but as far as analysis, I did a lot of work with Dr. Levengood.
Yeah.
Lefty, which was the nickname. We did the seed germination studies was one of the ones he did, but he didn't have, the sophisticated, scientific instrument that I had available. So my job and what we were testing there were biodegradation of pesticides and their footprint and what they look like so these agrochemical companies could get licenses to put this stuff out on the market. Mm-hmm. So I already knew I already had profiles of all the different types of pesticides that would be put on these plants. So I know what their degradation pattern would look like. So I did extractions on the pesticides that were put on the plants. Now the hoax plants gave a particular type of degradation pattern that you would find, no different than the standing upright, patterns that you find in the control samples, because it's the same exposure. What I'll air quote legitimate circles, the degradation pattern and there were many different types of pesticides that have different effects when you put different energies to them. I was finding a much different pattern, and it's the equivalent of basically trying to turn coal into diamonds by jumping on it. Okay. Well, I'm serious. I mean, these are chemical bonds that take this amount of energy to make this happen to degrade to this. So, it left me scratching my head. Here's one hoaxy that we know is man-made, and here's my pattern. This is what I predict. This goes from this to boom. Wait a minute. That's not right. And when you add in that pattern, where you could extract materials, and then you look at the physical, it's called nodes. Those particular ends that would be bent, and there would be what are called expulsion pits, where these things were steamed into place. Best way to describe it, they were steamed into place, or steam was a result of them being heated in some manner.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Does it seem to you that as real as the laws that govern all of the scientific explorations that you are involved in professionally, that there are, say, a similar set of laws that cover physics of paranormal, if you know what I mean? That it's not just
interesting. Well, Colin and I had this interesting little discussion. I'm sure he talks about we get back into that whole consciousness thing again.
Yeah.
Or, universal consciousness and what have you. Now, what's interesting is even the known crop circle makers are not sure where they get their inspiration.
I'm going to cut you off for 1 minute here to say that one of the things that increasingly interested me about the phenomena in getting to meet more and more people who were students of the subject across the UK and who, to one degree or another, made them was we have those who were the very first who did it in a spirit of, I want to show up this so-called expert. I want to, in my anonymousness here on the internet, I'm going to move some switches and dials, and I'm going to embarrass them in public, in the media. I get a kick out of that. Okay. Other people who loved the art of them, the patterning.
Yeah.
And like somebody like me who, when I was going to art school in New York, late 60s and in the 70s, the school I was kind of coming out of, heavily going on in the art world at the time, was minimal and conceptual art, where in some cases, like with the great Robert Smithson, he would get a grant, find a piece of property to lease in a remote part of the United States, have earth-moving equipment come in and create a beautiful design that could be seen from the air, photographed from helicopters. Those images were then sold, so to say, or underwritten for another NEA so that he could continue the work. There are people who make crop circles who do it for the art of it. Then there's the group that interests me the most, who are, and I've met a number of these people, who every season, May to September pretty much, crop season, at some point or another, get out there and start doing them with teams of other people as dedicated. And they may use that may be their summer vacation. And theirs are among the most intricate, the most geometrically precise, etc. And they have no idea what compels them to do this, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, well, again, like I said, it's that whole consciousness thing, according to, Colin. And what I find interesting is the need to try and distract, and I was like, we know that there's something going on, another force outside. And everybody goes back to the whole Doug and Dave thing. Everybody remembers them coming out saying we did it. What they don't remember is 6 months later saying, yep, we were put it up to it by the MOD. They had money. They paid us to say this. Oh, wait a minute.
And at best, they were working with boards.
Right.
At night. Not the most accurate. Every grain involved was broken.
Right.
Track leading in and out, all the conventional stuff.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's not every crop circle is a hoax, and not every crop circle is real. There's a mixture of both. And, all right. Back in the day, they tried to claim every crop circle as being this by this group and that group. I remember specifically one particular time, a group of researchers like, okay, you kept saying that's yours. All right. And we got the ways to prove this. Well, these researchers, they went out, they made their own hoax circle, came out, proclaimed it genuine. The hoaxing group goes, no, it isn't. Here's our proof. And the research group was like, no, we made this. Here's the video of us doing it. So your claim about being this and that is now suspect too. So, the need to try and claim and rationalize, not to say that there aren't, things behind it. Do you really, need to have your own imagination to do this, or can you be inspired?
Yeah.
Why can't you be inspired?
Matt, you've been involved in a good number of conferences as an organizer, as a participant, as a speaker, as a broadcaster. And some years ago, maybe you can help me zone in on it, it was a very popular cable show, Paranormal Investigations, the name of the two guys, and they became kind of underground superstars. And they had a conference. It was held in, I think, Clearwater, Florida. And through you, was hired to be their UFO speaker.
Yep.
And because a very favorite heavy metal group of yours is a very favorite heavy metal group of mine, the Blue Oyster Cult, and because I know them, you asked me if I thought they would be interested in performing.
Yep.
And I thought only if we ask, and we did, and they did.
Yep.
Unfortunately for them, the venue was outdoors, and it was about 99 humidity, 99 temperature.
Yeah.
So most of us, big fans, watched from in the hotel through the window.
In the air conditioning.
Somewhat disloyal.
Yeah.
But you gave me and one of my dearest friends, Albert Bouchard, the founding drummer of the group and one of the greatest guys and greatest musicians I've ever met,
Very
an opportunity to do something we've never done since, which is ghost hunt together.
Yeah.
And first of all, what was the name of the show and the conference? Do you remember offhand?
The show was Ghost Hunters. It was Jason Hawes, who was the main person that put it on. It was also done in cooperation with Nancy Planetta, who had her group down there.
Because I remember Jason and his partner
were
so well known and popular. They had their own action figures, which I was impressed by.
Yes.
And a zillion people turned out for the conference. I think one of the main draws, besides them, and people did want to meet them, like, ancient astronauts now, of meeting that crew. And for a lot of people who are big fans, it would be, really enjoyable. But their special guest was the legendary Linda Blair, who carries her own legend with her. And the building itself, and I have to say this, I've never been in a building like this, and I think sadly it no longer exists, if I remember correctly.
No, it still exists.
It does. Okay. Yeah. This was, when it was built, like the largest freestanding
wooden structure in the United States. Yeah.
And it has hundreds of rooms in it, hundreds of rooms. And what we were zoning in on, what you guys that were running the hunt were zoning in on, was that in the whole top tier, the dormers rooms where the help lived, the servant class, basically, almost all of whom were young women just come over from Ireland, and some of whom may lived and died their whole lives up there, or for a period of time, their hopes and dreams and hard work, these tiny rooms. And while the hotel was air conditioned, the upper tier was not. And quite a number of us went up there. You had all the hardware. And I remember being hot as hell and just following the protocols and being quiet and watching and listening while you guys were doing what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were measuring for and what was going on behind the scenes? Most important, what your best sense was of what we were dealing with there. It was a very moving experience, I will say that.
Right. And you're very correct. That's where one of the most haunted places was, up in the servants' quarters up there. And what you were looking at was a lot of people will call it residual haunting. That is like an echo left in, a location. Now, the guys from Ghost Hunter, Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson were the two guys. And they brought light to the whole subject matter with that original series. But this hotel had a history that went back literally, 100 years.
Yeah.
So the top floor had the most activity, mainly because, it's one of these things that anybody that struggles leaves a more indelible mark in their environment, because it's a struggle is a very strong emotionally charged energy.
Sure.
And it has a resonance, and that's what people were supposedly picking up if you're sensitive to those vibrations. And like I said, we're all a matter of vibration. Some people, I guess, are you're more sensitive to it than others. I have my own feeling about being sensitive and this and that. Other people may be far more sensitive than me. Other people may be about as sensitive as this desk that I'm and every level in between. So we all feel things differently because we're all different.
Do you remember the name of the hotel offhand? no reason you should. But what I remember mostly was when we got there, I walked around it. I wasn't, running or anything. I walked at a leisurely but a solid pace. It took me almost half an hour to walk around the base of the building. And then learning, they had a brochure there and people talking about the history of it, kings and queens and presidents and dignitaries and, international pop stars going back to before the turn of the century. And I think they had just announced that they were going to be doing a huge renovation. But I remember that there was 2 dining rooms. The smaller one, I think, seated over 800 people.
Correct.
And it had a ceiling of skylights, all created by the Lewis Comfort Tiffany Company.
Correct.
It had to be, I mean, even in its slightly, tarnished reality, it was jaw-dropping to me. And to see so many people turn out, I had never, if I had been to a paranormal conference, it was a smaller one, hundreds of people, and many of them obviously identify themselves as local, very active paranormal research groups. And the line to stand on to meet, the stars or pay some bucks and, get a signed glossy or something, I think people had to stand online for 2 hours. Same for the line to meet Linda Blair, who Albert did get to spend a little time with, and is charming and smart and really interesting, whose career, of course, was kind of, talk about typecasting, a very fine young actress who really never had a chance to manifest, her range, and who forever was asked to play more parts like that. But that was that was an eye-opener for me, that evening of doing that hunt, and just being part of that world rather than, the UFO world I most often associate with conferences.
Well, I was honored to be able to have you come. I mean, you are one of the more trusted people in ufology that I am proud to call friends. And as you know, people may not know me so much in the UFO field. I'm kind of hidden in the background of all of this because I prefer to be the guy doing stuff, also doing the show and things, but it's not about me, it's about the subject. And unfortunately, in a lot of the UFO field, what I'm seeing, it's me, look at me, I'm the dancing, and there are some legitimate, true researchers. I consider you one of the true researchers and genuine UFO people in this. And, I have to say, for both Grant Wilson and Jason Hawes, they literally have a passion for, the paranormal. The other final thing that I do some work in, and I got some of my Bigfoot casts back here, is I've been doing some hair sample analysis, genetic things related to Bigfoot and other things. So I cover all the bases. I'm looking at everything because there's one thing I found. It's all related.
Well, we're on the subject of Bigfoot and hair analysis, which is a very good place to start. Have you, in any of your Bigfoot-related investigations, come upon evidence that you've been able to substantiate in a way where the results really surprised you or caught you off guard in how definitive they were that this was not human hair or the hair of any kind of animal that we are aware of?
Well, if you really want to find something definitive, look at the work done by Melba Ketchum. She's been lambasted by other people, but her work is solid. The science is solid. They don't want to listen to it. They don't want to believe it, but the data is the data. You can have your opinions, you can have your theories, but at the end of the day, when these sums come up and it adds to this, this is what matters. You can argue how it got there and but the sums equal this.
We're stuck with it one way or the other.
Yeah.
Any thoughts to anybody that might be listening, watching the show, saying, I listened to this guy, He obviously is, smart, knows what he's talking about. But I have just a problem with that whole paranormal thing. Most of it has to be interpreted in other ways. It's conventional. It's, wish fulfillment. It's people who have a strong sense of fantasy who want it to be reality. And isn't that charming? And kind of the equivalent of Welcome to Space Brothers. But, who knows if the research that this guy's talking about is really quite as up as it can be. I don't know. I relegate that to the realm of possibility and not reality. And people who think ghosts are real, that's nice. Or, that there's immortality and reincarnation and it all works out well, just the way you want it after you die. I take it all with a grain of salt. But the fact is, as a man of science, you are absolutely convinced through the hard work of research, evaluation, evidence, witnesses, location visits, that we are dealing with these two different parallel, equally real worlds, although one is on the other side of the veil, so to speak.
Is it? What's the veil? It's all one thing. Again, you go back to consciousness, vibration, but you're right. I mean, UFOs make sense physics-wise, that there's other planets we know are out there. We can see them. We got photographs from, all the different telescopes and satellites that we've got out there looking at stuff. We know that people exist. We know that energy transfers and, what have you. It goes into a different state. Why is that? We've had stories of visitors from the stars, and ghost stories are the oldest stories that man has been telling from day one. Okay, this isn't new. You're talking about a person not accepting that, okay. The reason that people like me and other people will use equipment in ghost hunting is for a reason. It is to augment our own natural senses without being able to be interfered or biased. Because your eyes work one way, but the camera sees in the parts of the spectrum that your eyes do not see. A microphone and recording equipment will pick up frequencies your ears do not hear. We use thermometers and EMF meters to pick up heat and other electromagnetic forms of energy, the way your skin acts. And we even have ion meters that work similar to your nose. They're amplifying all of these senses. And if you're chasing ghosts, you got issues, but you get my point. These pieces of equipment are there to augment your senses. They also are not subject to hallucination. A camera picks up whatever the camera is picking up. The audio recorder is picking up whatever the audio recorder is picking up. We can argue all day about what we're seeing in the picture and what we're hearing on the recording, or what, the EMF and temperature sensors mean or could be from. But at the end of the day, they're independent and more valid than, just saying it's nothing. Well, nothing doesn't affect, these things.
With about half a minute to go, where can people follow your work, Matt, or keep up with what you're doing? Is there a location?
Well, yeah, SpookySouthCoast.com. I'm on the air pretty much every Saturday, as you know, 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. I'm working with Tom Reed on Interspace TV and InterSpaceTV.com. Or go to UFO Expo, UFOXPO.com. We're setting up a whole bunch of events for Roswell. We've got given 2 dates, one in March and one in September annually, that will bracket the regular 4th of July thing. So we
will be promoting that right here on this show. And Matthew Moniz, my dear friend, thank you so much for joining me tonight. If you have enjoyed the show, please tell your friends. See you next week. Same time, same station. Stand up for what you believe in. Stay safe. and be kind to each other.
Live long and prosper.